sort of big idea stuff. Again, we're talking about the microscopic scale of things. And so cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. Cellular respiration, it happens in the mitochondria. And the whole point is that we want to make ATP. We've talked about ATP before for plants, that there's ATP is made. Ooh, where is ATP made in photosynthesis? Like, that was so 3 days ago, Stephanie. Between photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. Okay, yeah. I didn't see people, no, just online people. There was nobody like shouting that out, just so you know. All right. And by the way, cellular respiration, I'm talking about this for our bodies, but plants do this too. It's kind of wild. They're going to use this as well. So ATP is a big deal because it is the energy currency for the cell. It's how stuff gets done. This is used to drive reactions in the cell. It basically lowers the activation energy. Super, super important. And a lot of this happens because the mitochondria have all this surface area, all these countertops, all those membranes to get things done. All right. So we're going to talk about, there are two basic types of cellular respiration. I see lots of writing still happening, so I'm going to slow down. There are two basic types, but cellular respiration really is a big deal. This is how your body gets the energy it needs to do the stuff that it does, okay, is by making this ATP. And we get the energy to make ATP from the foods that we eat, okay? I might have had a lot on the sugar scale this last weekend, all right? So we're going to carry on here. All right, so there are two basic types of cellular respiration. Our first type is the type that we're going to focus on. It's called aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration. Aerobic means with oxygen. Now, I'm old. I was a kid in the 80s, like long ago. So the cool exercise at that time, what is the cool exercise right now? Don't even know. Bicep curls. Just straight up weights and bicep curls. All right. Because for a while it was like CrossFit and there's Pilates and there's other things like that too. Okay. But when I was a kid in the 80s, there were people in leotards working out, sweating to the oldies kind of thing. But it was like aerobics is what it was called. And I think of aerobics because you're breathing hard, right? You're like, you need a lot of oxygen. So aerobic respiration is when you have oxygen. And the cool thing about this is that it makes many, many more ATP than if we don't have oxygen. Okay, many more. We also have, though, this other kind, anaerobic respiration, and that is respiration without oxygen. The an is referring to without. Now, bless you, anaerobic respiration is still good because, on a side note, and if you study this more, if you do more science classes, you'll learn about how this basically resets everything to be ready for aerobic cellular respiration. You get a little bit of ATP, so there are fewer ATP. But it helps to like reset things. So you get a little bit of energy, but it helps to reset things. Now, but I would argue as an adult, okay, that there are some benefits from anaerobic respiration. And for me, that would be alcohol in terms of like some of it, okay? But plants can produce ethanol, and we'll talk about this later on when we discuss livers and things like that. That is also like basically micro poisoning yourself too, or maybe macro poisoning yourself to a degree. That's like how some of the effects from alcohol that happen on your body are because it's basically you're intoxicated. You're giving yourself a toxic substance. All right. But animals produce lactic acid. If you have that burn in your legs, honestly, for me, it's the first time I go skiing. It's just like wrecks me, okay? And let's say it's been a giant powder day, and I'm just like, woo! Fights are like ready to go. And halfway down the face, I'm just like, my legs are on fire, okay? And that's because my body has run out of oxygen to make all of that ATP that it needs for those muscles. And so what's happening is that now that burning feel that you have, that is lactic acid. Your body is not able to do aerobic respiration because you're burning stuff too fast. And so now it's making this anaerobic respiration. And it kind of helps because what happens, you have to stop and breathe for a minute, right? You're like, they're going, oh man, like super breathing for a moment when you have this lactic acid. People, not myself, who trained for this a bit before, so like, I mean, my husband, he's pretty hardcore. He like works out like exactly so that he can, and he just flies, all right? But if you train for this, or any type of an athlete, if you are a runner, if you wrestle, if you play basketball, whatever else, softball, if you're like running and moving and doing all these things, your body builds up more mitochondria in your cells, and your red blood cells of your like circulatory system get better at carrying oxygen. And so you do better, and you don't get wiped out into anaerobic cellular respiration. Okay? It's kind of an interesting sort of a thing. So it's one of those things, and it's for different people. And again, if you are an athlete or if you've trained for this, some people who are training for the Olympics, like especially any of like the running type of events, they will go and train at high altitudes. They'll go to Colorado or somewhere else because the air is thinner there. So what does their body need to do? They need to make more hemoglobin. And their body needs to be better at making the most of the oxygen that's available. So when you take them and put them back down on sea level, their like body is like amped, ready to go because it can better handle all that stuff. So it's kind of an interesting thing for sure. So our focus is going to be on aerobic cellular respiration, the one with oxygen. So general equation for this, and this again, aerobic with oxygen, is going to be C6H12O6. That's our old friend glucose, plus 6 oxygens, and we're going to make 6 carbon dioxides, plus 6 waters, and then I'm going to put off on a side note plus a whole bunch of ATP. It's kind of off to the side. It's not listed in my regular products because it's not technically something that I can do my chemistry, stoichiometry, and balance out. It's like a happy byproduct of this reaction. What is this? Oh, because some of you are writing frantically. All right. So the ATP is basically like I'm going to write happy byproduct. That's not probably a technical term, but it works for us. Okay. What does this equation look like? Photosynthesis backwards. Yes. It really is. Photosynthesis backwards. Only we don't have the whole in the presence of chlorophyll and like sunlight and all that stuff. Cellular respiration is the burning of the stuff that was made during photosynthesis. And plants do both things. Usually they do more, photosynthesizing plants do more of the photosynthesis than they do of the cellular respiration. So it still works out well for us to eat like some of the glucose and to have that oxygen and whatever else. But yeah, it is basically photosynthesis in reverse. Okay? Kind of a wild thing. So what we're going to do now is, and this is, we're not going to do Z-scheme kind of a thing. And I'm going to basically show you the steps for this a little bit. Or not really the steps, but like the highlight reel for these different stages. But this does definitely happen in stages. All right. So in terms of these stages or like different steps kind of a thing, the first one is called glycolysis. Glycolysis. I'm going to switch to blue. I like blue better. Glycolysis. So let's look at the parts of this word. What does lysis mean? We've talked about this before. Coming apart, right? And based on our equation that we have, the glyco is referring to the glucose. So this is basically saying glucose comes apart. Now, you should know that this also does happen in the anaerobic cellular respiration too, but basically this is when we're splitting apart that glucose. Okay. So this first stage is glycolysis, and this is when we split apart the glucose. The next two things, so this also happens in anaerobic, and this is basically, it like goes through something else. It goes through like fermentation. So like if you've had like kimchi or anything basically that's kind of fermented something, then that's like this process, that's anaerobic cellular respiration. And that's like looping it on back kind of a thing. So that also happens in anaerobic respiration. But these other two need to have oxygen. And we have something called Krebs cycle. Name for somebody, Krebs. But now, more often, it's called the citric acid cycle because it involves citric acid. And we have something called the electron transport chain. And I'm going to just abbreviate this ETC. And for these second two, you must have oxygen. So those second two are the things that only happen in aerobic cellular respiration. The weird thing is the oxygen isn't actually even going to get used until you get to the electron transport chain, but you can't like start the other part without having it. Okay? So these are the three stages. We've got splitting of our glucose. Then we've got something called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle, and then we have this electron transport chain. What I'm going to do is go through like the inputs and outputs of each one of these stages. And our key focus here is to think about how many ATP we get out of each of these. Now, some of you have learned about cellular respiration before, and to be fair, you might have even learned a different value number for how many ATP you get out of these different steps because they are approximate. Not all cells are exactly like as efficient as others, okay? So, but we've got some like big ideas here for there's one that's going to be like the superstar basically for getting a whole bunch of ATP. So I'm going to go through each of these three steps and I want you to just focus on like the inputs and outputs. So what do I get in, have at the start of this and what do I get out of it? So, splitting glucose, glycolysis, inputs. We need to have glucose, so remember that's C6H12O6. And this is a little weird we need to put in 2 ATP to get started. Basically, you have to pay to play, kind of a thing. You have to put in some ATP to get started. I think of this as like on a roller coaster, okay? Silverwood. Whenever you get on a roller coaster, you get strapped in. What's the first thing you do on your roller coaster? Like, what does the roller coaster do first? Goes slowly up a hill. Just think about this. If it's a true roller coaster, it goes slowly up a hill first. And that's like kind of the dramatic part, because you're like, questioning your life choices, right? As you're like going up there, okay? And it makes that horrible clack, 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 clack sound as you're going on up. But if you're doing that, that is a little bit of activation energy. It takes a little bit of energy to get that roller coaster started. But once you make it over the hill, then it just does all that spinning and all that kind of a stuff and whatever else. So we need to put in 2 ATP to get this started. Okay? Our outputs are 2 pyruvates. I'm not worried if you know that it's called a pyruvate. I just want you to know that there are 3 carbon molecules, because we split that 6 carbon thing into 2 3 carbon things now. And we get 4 ATP. And we also get NADH. Not the same as our friend NADPH that we had for photosynthesis, but still works like that. It's like a battery. So we put in 2 to start, and we got 4, so we net 2 ATP. So we got some. Wasn't tons. That's all right. Basically, that's the 4 that we got out of it minus the 2 to start. And that's how we end up with 2 net ATP. This also happens for anaerobic cellular respiration. So it's only getting 2 when it does that. It does this like little thing and gets a little loop each time. So those are our inputs and outputs. So now we're walking away with 2 bonus ATP. We've got some pyruvates and this NADH stuff. Okay. So now we're going to take those things and go to the next stage, which is the Krebs cycle, or citric acid cycle. Am I going too fast? No? Okay. All right. There's a lot going on here. This picture, please don't draw. This is just basically to try to get you to appreciate the fact that I'm not making you know all the little things. You're like supposed to be like, oh, thank you, Stephanie, good. We don't have to know all the little details. And that's not even the actual chemical equations. That's just showing you some of the basic little models of it. So, inputs. There's something called acetyl-CoA. To be honest, I'm not going to ask too much about this. That's made from the pyruvates. There's like a little side jaunt first, a little side quest first before it goes on this. But the outputs we get from this, 2 ATP. We also get our carbon dioxide. Remember that? For this cellular respiration, that is a product. That's one of the things that we get at the end. And then we get more of this NADH and FADH2. These are batteries. They carry electrons. Okay? And remember, this only happens if there is oxygen. We don't use oxygen in this, but it's only allowed to happen. You're only allowed to progress to this stage if there is oxygen available, because the oxygen is going to be used in the next part. So this is the Krebs cycle, and this is, well, if you live in like the weird social media land that I do, like which is all like science things, nerdy science things, people make fun of like being able to recite Krebs cycle and all that stuff. I cannot anymore, like all of the different little things, okay? If I had to in a pinch, maybe be fuzzy. But this is one of those things that's like a biology person, you're definitely going to learn. How many ATP in total have we made so far? What's our net ATP so far? Well, from this we have 2, and the last time we had a net of 2, right? So we've made 4 ATP so far. Cool. But here's where we're going to get into like the majority of the ATP being made. I think I'm going too fast, but that's all right. If we get out early, we get out early. Okay. This one is like the superhero. Majority of the ATP. Yay! Okay. All right. The electron transport chain, also known as the ETC, not etc. Somebody asked me why I was writing etc. on there. No, it's an acronym, ETC, electron transport chain. This is where we finally use our oxygen. And we use our batteries that we made at the other parts. So this is where we're finally using our oxygen and we're using the batteries, that NADH and FADH too. Sometimes those are called coenzymes. I'm not worried if you know that part, but these batteries. And our outputs, we make water, and we get 28-ish, I'm going to say, because you might have learned a different number, ATP. And this is like an average. And again, like I said, not everybody agrees on that exact number. 28. So far, we'd only made 4. We made 2 in the first one, net 2, or like the 2 in the second one, and now we've made 28 ATP. And this is kind of a little diagram here. You certainly don't need to try to draw that or know the parts, but basically it's like this whole cool little system. And I think I have a better picture, and so I'll show you a zoomed in picture of this one and explain it a little bit. But the key parts are, now we're adding in our oxygen that we needed, and those batteries that we made, and we get out water. It's kind of funny. Last time we split water, and now we're going to make water. So it really is like the opposite of photosynthesis. Okay? And we get 28 ATP. And this is the electron transport chain. And this electron transport chain works because of all these membranes that are in the mitochondria. That's like surface area. So I'm going to show you a zoom in, kind of like this picture here, bigger. You don't need to know it, but some of us like to know like how the little parts work or have something to picture when we're doing that. So I'm going to talk about it for a moment, but it is not something that you need to draw or know the little steps for at all, okay? So this picture here is showing what's going on. This is the electron transport chain. Notice, here's the electrons right here, electron carriers, but this is the electrons that are making their way all the way along. This is a membrane that all of those electron carriers are in. How this works is kind of like a hydroelectric dam. Sounds weird, but where we live, hydroelectric dams are a big deal. Off the Spokane River. What happens for hydroelectric dam? We've got a buildup of what on one side? Water, right? And so what happens is when that water is let through the dam, it spins these turbines. And that turbine spinning helps to create electrical energy. It basically moves from a mechanical energy because it's pushing past it and converts it to electrical energy. One of those basic energy principles is energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes shape. Sometimes it's lost its heat. Okay? So when we have a hydroelectric dam, like we have on the river here, you have a whole bunch of water pushing up against this dam, and you have a little opening with turbines that's letting some of it go. And that pushes those turbines and spins it to make the electricity. So what we have here is we have these little pumps. We have this NADH and NAD+. Basically, what's happening is they're dropping off of these hydrogens. These hydrogen ions are like the water of our hydroelectric dam. And they're all building up on one side of the membrane. Okay, so they're getting pumped across. This is the electron transport chain. It's moving all these little hydrogens across. There's way more of them on that side than there are on the other side. Like a hydroelectric dam. You've got a whole bunch more water on one side than you do on the other. So what happens is over here, when they come through, this is like the piston of a hydroelectric dam. When we're letting some of those hydrogens go through, now it swirls it around, and that's where we make our ATP. That energy is used to make ATP, which is now a usable energy. Same thing for us, going from the hydroelectric dam, the water, to electricity, now that's usable for us. So don't worry about this, but I just think of it as like a hydroelectric dam kind of a thing, and some people like to see all the little details and pictures of it. All right. And then this is where you're making your water, because we have our oxygen and we're picking up some little hydrogens here, making a whole bunch of water as well. All right. So let's discuss our total ATP from cellular respiration. How much do we make? So for aerobic cellular respiration, this is the with oxygen, because we had 2 from glycolysis plus 2 from Krebs plus 28 from the electron transport chain. Tons. Now, have you guys learned 30 to 34 or somewhere in there? People have learned this before? No? All right, just checking. So we made 32. That's like the big deal. That's a ton of it there. What about, so that's aerobic. That's because we had oxygen. So because we had oxygen, we were able to do the Krebs and the ETC because there was oxygen there. For anaerobic respiration, we only would make 2 because you only have the 2 from glycolysis. So that's why, my friends, when you feel the burn, you stop and you breathe for a bit too, because now what's happening is your muscles don't have enough ATP to keep going, that energy to drive the reactions kind of a thing. So it slows you down. That's generally speaking when people stop or slow down. Now, obviously, you can still run or ski through burning legs kind of a thing, but at a certain point, it's going to slow you down. Now, here's the thing, though. This is all dealing, for our general equation for this, remember, we needed glucose and what else did we have to start with? Glucose and oxygen. C6, whoops, that wasn't good. C6H12O6 plus 6 oxygens, and we made 6 carbon dioxides plus 6 waters. Glucose. Here's the deal though. Glucose is not very common in our diets. We have a lot of sugar. We eat a lot of sugar. Some of us, me, ate a lot this last weekend, okay, because I did not have near as many trick-or-treaters as I expected. Slackers. Come on, you're supposed to be coming back. I don't care how old people are when they come to my house for trick-or-treating. I give parents candy too. That's fine. So, glucose is not that common in our diet because glucose is blood sugar, basically. It's a certain kind of sugar. Sucrose is like table sugar. If you were to sprinkle sugar on your strawberries, let's say, something like that, or the things that are being used to make my favorite Reese's like peanut butter cups, okay? Sucrose. That's where that's at. Not the same thing as glucose. So how this relates to our future stuff for the digestive system is basically the things that we eat. So, or even if you're eating starches or whatever else, it has to get broken down into glucose, which is the usable form for your body to make this ATP. So that's kind of how this leads into our digestive system stuff. All right. Because sucrose is a disaccharide. Table sugar is a disaccharide. Di meaning two. That's like two glucose molecules put together. All right. So this is where we carry on to our like molecules. So free glucose molecules are not common in our diets. Most of us are not eating glucose. You might have glucose, let's say if you are someone, and we will talk about this later on, who experiences low blood sugar. Okay, or let's say if you're diabetic, kind of have, in case you have had like an abundance of insulin kind of a thing, then you might need more glucose. But glucose is not something that's generally found in our diet. So what we're going to do now is go through a few of, way back from first exam, your biological macromolecules, those things that we ate. Remember the picture of the sandwich, right? We talked about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. We're going to talk about how those relate to this making of energy in your cells. Because that's a big part of when you eat things for your digestive system, is to have this energy to run your cells. So in terms of carbohydrates, aside from like simple sugar, so like sucrose, like I said, table sugar, we do have some big, large storage sugar materials as well. So starch is a polysaccharide. This, my friends, is in plants. I think of like potatoes. Okay, potatoes have a lot of starch in them. And it's a polysaccharide, so it's a whole bunch of glucose molecules all hooked together. And it gets broken down into glucose, to this monosaccharide, or the monomer. Remember, glucose is the monomer. This is all leading into us talking about digestive system and how we go from these big polymers down to the monomers again. It's weird. We took like this crazy cyclical journey. Like we just did photosynthesis, which is the opposite of this and works with this, and then now we're doing all this stuff. It'll be all right. Okay. In animals, sugar is generally stored in glycogen, the form of glycogen. Glycogen is found like in liver and your muscles. Your muscles have this storage of glycogen in it so that it's ready to go for that sugar if you need to break it down to use it to make ATP so that you can run and run and run, or ski and ski and ski, or whatever it is. So glycogen, this is what it's like in us and in other animals. Weirdly enough, fungi also use glycogen. So like a mushroom, molds, things like that. Kind of strange. They use glycogen also. Okay. So then we have the glucose then enters glycolysis. So once in your body, if you're breaking down starch, if you're breaking down glycogen, like the starch that you've eaten or your own glycogen that you've produced or something that you've eaten that is glycogen, then now you have that glucose and that can start into glycolysis. It's weird to think about, In terms of the human diet, in our body, for the digestive system, the first macromolecule that gets broken down is starch. And starches start to get basically broken down in your mouth. Fats, proteins, things like that don't happen until later. Fats is not till like the beginning of your small intestine. But in your mouth, we start with starches. And that's because starches are really, really long. And so your body needs to work on that to get as much of the glucose out of it as possible to run all of your different reactions. In cats or dogs, things that have more of a protein-based diet, they start digesting proteins in their mouth right off the bat, not starches. So they have different enzymes in their mouth that start. So they have like proteases. Instead, we have like amylase. It's kind of a weird thing. So different in terms of animals, different animals start to digest different things in different places, depending upon what their diet is mostly made of. So for our biological macromolecules, we had carbohydrates, and now moving on, proteins and lipids. And then we even have more. For proteins, what's the monomer? Anybody remember? What's the monomer of a protein? Little things. What's that? Amino acids. Yes, the amino acids. So proteins are made of amino acids. Those are the monomer for that. And amino acids then, later on, they can get broken down to be kind of, and recombined to become glucose. It's not straightforward like that. But they can actually jump in on that whole glycolysis at a certain point. Fats can too. It's kind of a weird thing. Lipids are made up of fatty acids and glycerol. Remember, those were the monomers that made up a lipid. And your body can use proteins and lipids, and in glycolysis, they can like jump in at a certain point without converting it to glucose. It's kind of an interesting thing. I don't know why I have my number 3 here, not my 1 and 2. So for 1 and 2, basically, these are like just kind of FYI, just informational kinds of things. Glycerol enters in the middle of glycolysis. So just in terms of like your fats, it hops in there, and then fatty acids, the acetyl-CoA enters into the Krebs cycle. So these can just jump right on in to different points of glycolysis without being glucose to start. It's kind of a weird thing. And in terms of calories, and maybe this has changed if you've had a recent nutrition class, but fats generally have more than twice as many calories, like per unit, as carbohydrates and proteins. It's kind of a weird thing to think about. For calories, and this is just a side note too, you don't have to write this down, but just so you know, for carbs, what do they usually say? It's like 4 calories per unit. Proteins, it's 4, and fats, do you know what that number is? I think it's 9 usually, but it varies. So in other words, per unit or mass for things, fats are going to have over twice as many calories. That's why nuts, for example, if you eat almonds or pecans or peanuts, something like that, they're nutrient rich, because that's a bunch of the endosperm we talked about for plants, so it's about a nutrition. But also, there's a lot of calories in that kind of a thing. Now, calories are not necessarily good, bad, or otherwise. It's just an information about how much energy something has. Do you know how they calculate calories? In chemistry, has anybody taken chemistry where you used a calorimeter at all before? So it's enough energy to heat 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius, I believe. It's a measurement of energy that can it goes from this energy and like chemical energy to like heat energy. That's how they measure it. It's kind of an interesting thing. All right, I have one more slide. This is like the most important slide of this whole thing. This is like the key idea, all the big things. This is mostly, if I'm going to ask you about this, this is like it. On this next slide, the most of it. So, general equation for cellular respiration. We've got glucose plus oxygen, and we make carbon dioxide, water. How many ATP did we get out of it if we have aerobic cellular respiration, if we have the oxygen? How many total ATP? Yes, 32 for aerobic versus only 2 for anaerobic. So that's a big idea, right? Way better for that organism to have oxygen. You can make way more ATP. This is starting even with like the same glucose and all that stuff kind of a thing. If you have oxygen, you get to make way more ATP. Oh, right, and I forgot to put my plus ATP on the side. But remember, I kind of have it off to the side a little bit because if you're being picky about chemistry and stoichiometry and having everything be matchy-matchy on either side, ATP is really just like our happy byproduct, okay? It's not something that we are like have balanced on the beginning and the end of our reaction. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, take chemistry and then you'll know. Wow. Okay. So, I have a couple more things to put on here. It happens in the mitochondria of eukaryotic cells. I'm kind of skipping over those prokaryotic cells. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. Prokaryotic cells, think of like all sorts of different things. So we're going to just talk about mitochondria of eukaryotic cells. And then I have down here as a reminder, refresher, so that you're pumped and ready for knowing about your monomers, polymers and monomers, macromolecules. Proteins are made up of a whole bunch of amino acids. Remember we had like a little chain, and then they could get twists or folds and then bunch in on themselves, or you could even go crazy and have 2 of them get tangled. Okay? Carbohydrates. Their monomers are monosaccharides, namely glucose. Lipids, we had fatty acids and glycerol were the monomers. And then what's our last kind of biological macromolecule? Nucleic acids. What are nucleic acids? What are the monomers of nucleic acids? Yeah. Nucleotides. Da-da-da. And a nucleotide, remember, is made up of 3 little parts: sugar, phosphate, nitrogenous base. It's all coming around. There was a method to the madness of learning all these things. So, on Wednesday, we're going to start with our digestive system stuff. And we're going to be doing this like map through of things and talking about the digestion that happens all along on the little trail of the digestive system. I'm excited to see you for dissecting pigs tomorrow or Thursday. All right. Happy trails. Have a good day.